Thank you so much. We would now like to open the floor for questions on this part of the discussion.
I think someone on the right there, please see. Okay.
It's perfectly fine here. I mean, I just got very good points from this conversation that the ultimate objective for all of us sitting here as economists would be to create a society with happy and contented people. And that definitely requires the efficiency and effectiveness in the policy making. But the point that remained absent from this discussion has there is no incentive and disincentive mechanism working here in this country. I mean, if I just ask the simple question to me, why I need to be more efficient and more productive, the only thing is that some incentive can drive me to bring some efficiency and effectiveness in all the jobs that I do. The same goes for all the sectors of the society. We have discussed macroeconomic policy challenges and policies like trade policy, like investment policy, like human resource oriented policies and all that. But we don't talk that much about the incentive mechanisms that is very much needed in all these important policy areas. And at the same time, equally important is the disincentive mechanism. When I say disincentive mechanism, I do mean here the accountability arrangements. I mean, we did talk about inefficiency of public sector, but why public sector is inefficient? The prime reason is that there is no accountability mechanism that is working in this country. The prime reason is that all the civil servants, they just are, the corruption, is not just the monetary corruption. The biggest form of corruption is the corruption of non-performance that we see everywhere around us every day. So that is something, and if we offer this kind of incentive and this incentive mechanism to the general public out there as well as the agents of our society, definitely things are going to improve. Secondly, the point that we largely missed in this conversation is the quality of the institutions. As Douglas North says, if we don't tighten the the humanly devised constraints that facilitate these transactions, then the outcome is not going to be the productive. So for productivity, what I see, these two things are extremely important, and that needs to be a part of this discussion that we are making here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are amazing points. Anyone else has a question?
Sorry, I don't want to sound like a seventh discussant, but a couple of points on the industrial policy now, because this is specific to you. Sometimes in economics we say that before starting how to do the industrial policy, how would we think how not to do the industrial policy? And this is coming from some of mine and some research also that, we find in some of our papers that textile manufacturers who were receiving R&D subsidy, they were less innovative than those who were not receiving R&D incentive. So, why not to have some broader goal, for example, thinking like who creates a bigger externality, let's say in terms of knowledge or in terms of upstream and downstream expansion of the sectors, and we decide policies based on that. Other one is really a simple question, because we are having two rectors here of two top institutions of Lahore and in Pakistan, and I just follow up on your question. Can we export education from here? Whether that will be feasible, that places like LUMS, like LSE, welcome foreign students, and we also start exporting our education program.
I'll take themes of that last point. So I agree with you about institutions. I think building state capacity is going to be a big challenge. I don't think there isn't incentive to this. Because I think what I've seen over the past 20 years is that actually the trust in the state is collapsing. That makes it really hard to govern. So anybody who's sitting and governing, I don't envy their position. I understand that formal mechanisms of accountability have been disrupted again and again. But I think that pressure that public servants are under to deliver in some sense. And in fact, constantly you have this musical chairs going on where people are removed, inducted, removed, inducted, removed, inducted. So I think the bigger question is how can you create a framework and push to coordinate structural change within them? And that, of course, should bring the right incentives. In fact, I would say that if you look at the collapse of PMLN politically, that has happened over the past two elections, given the base that they had in 2018 and 2019, you would actually imagine that there would have been a lot of heat on them, and I imagine there is. So what is it that is still blocking them from making those changes is a question that's, I think, an important question. We're very committed to internationalization, at least internationalizing the student body. We're working on that. I think there are kind of challenges. One big challenge is that there is a Pakistan effect. There is this notion of safety. There is, I don't think universities from Pakistan have made international pitches. I don't think, given our challenges of servicing education needs here, that's not going to be a priority, but I think that should certainly be a direction. I think it's also very good for our student body to have a degree of diversity there. I think there's also the national question of how do you actually integrate people from different parts of Pakistan, whether it's law school, us, other universities. I think we all purport to be national universities. And I think we need a greater push on that mission as well. But there I think the progress is, very positive. But on internationalization, certainly. But again, over there, we would need some enabling support. So the story out of Pakistan is that the internet is being disrupted. That's not a message I can go with for international recruitment.
On the state, I had the privilege of actually being involved with two reports on the efficiency of the federal government. One, the Chatham Commission in the 90s, and then later on, about 15, 20 years ago, from Musharraf, where I wrote the efficiency of the federal government of Pakistan. And I remember it was Musharraf at that time, and I told him, I said, after calling all these ministries in and having them sit in front of us, he said, I said, I have never feared for Pakistan until this moment, because Pakistan has the weakest federal government I have ever come across. And he said, what do you mean? I said, look, you have this absurd situation where, for instance, at that time, the budget of the federal secretariats was lower than the combined budget of the World Bank, the IMF, Asian Bank, and the other UN institutions in the summer. You have actually very little capacity in the federal government. You look at your Department of Petroleum Concessions, you have one joint secretary, two deputy secretaries, and 4 section officers. At that time, maybe they're stronger now. And sitting across them are multinationals which import $20 billion worth of energy products a year, and who produce another $10 billion, $20 billion of energy products in Pakistan. The only problem, but this is a political issue, is that our secretariats are overstaffed by lower level staff. That is the simple problem. Now, it's a political decision whether you want to, it's an employment issue. I do not agree with the fact, I think improving, downsizing, right-sizing, these are all sensible things to do. But I do think that you don't want to lose give an example, and here I wanted to say that I keep reading about the abolition of possible of the AGC. I personally think, with all respect, the AGC has done a great job. They have made a lot of mistakes, and maybe you want to do a thing. But I do think that we don't really need to push hard. I think we need to look at our agencies, and we mustn't lose capacity to do analytical work and set standards wherever we can. I think it's absolutely crucial that we do that. So I would like to state that. With regard to Wakar's tantalizing thought about us exporting and having foreign students, I think Lams has done a wonderful job integrating Pakistan. We are all very proud of Lams. I personally am very proud of Lams' accomplishments and Dr. Jiva's personal accomplishments, so I need to say that. But I do think that Wakar has raised a very interesting issue. While Hamla, I think, was a little unfair, the Akhil said that we shouldn't have given Javelin all these crores of rupees, and maybe we should, and maybe we could have done it some way or the other. I tell you, the ordinary people of Pakistan felt so good about it, because for once you could see a fellow standing in front of them who looked like them, who was one of them, and he didn't get anything special. Came from an unrelated little hut, and he went and he proved himself in the most classical of events in the Olympics, the javelin. It's a symbol of the Olympics. He won the javelin throw. And I think it reassured us, because a lot of Pakistanis have lost confidence in themselves. People who worked on Ghana, I worked on Ghana, full of the most. You see, one of the things I think, and you've been listening to all these wonderful people over the last 3-4 days, human beings everywhere are exceptional, whether you like it or not. And by the way, the Ghanaians are very exceptional. So I admire them tremendously. But the Pakistanis are as exceptional as everybody else, whether it be Sindhis or Balochis or this and that. And as I said, from being physically normal, because we keep hearing about people being stunted and wasted, but here was a young man who was neither stunted nor wasted and proved himself to be physically one of the fittest people in the world. So I do think what Wakar is saying is correct, that we need to turn our human resources, especially into areas of importance, and that is education and health. And there's absolutely no reason why Pakistan cannot both be internally successful in these two sectors, but also internationally competitive. So I would like to state that. And by the way, I'll thank you formally a little later. I think the presence of all our international guests have done a lot, to encourage, I think, certainly the people of Pakistan and the people of Lahore, knowing that we have such great economists, wonderful people coming to Lahore, taking the time out, coming to a country which people consider unsafe and participating in us, I think is the way forward. I think we need to integrate with the world, and then we need to look out. You're already our Dean of Graduate Studies, so I think we're now charged.
A few things. One is, I completely agree, the government is huge, it has no capacity. I was working with the Punjab government on an industrial strategy, and they were saying they have 10 PhDs from China had prepared a strategy, after the Pak China FTA, and this is their 300-page report. and we can't find anyone on our side to read it or comment on it. Would you give us some comments? So it's huge, but it doesn't have the capacity. I would say the one thing I'm finding oddly enough is, I know you're asking for more accountability, is now with this, gotcha type of things, with the IPPs and this and that, we're finding that civil servants are not willing to even make the right decisions out of fear that 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, that this decision will be questioned and they'll be hauled up in front of some accountability bureau or something. So you don't want to cripple them enough. There's so much that they're there, right? In terms of education, I think, we can combine a lot of the issues. I think if LUMS could lead the way and start providing online international education, then I think next year Dr. Chima will be coming in his private helicopter, riding there, because I think that is it. I think we need to, and why can't we provide health services? You see celebrities from the EU going to Turkey to get facelifts. Pakistan has some of the best doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals in the world. If we could develop the infrastructure and the image of Pakistan, because I think students are not coming here because they're scared, or the government is scared to have certain students from certain countries because they're like, are they here to do something wrong? Right? There's that, and then I think medical tourism and all is incredibly difficult to get. So I think exporting of services is the key. I just think we need to present ourselves as a stable, professional, educated, competent country that can provide these services is the way to go, actually. So I really believe that.
I just wanted to make a point that I think we're moving. I read the other day that 126 countries can apply for a visa online, and they're claiming that you fill in 30 questions, and you press the button, and you open your inbox, and your visa will be there. Let's keep our fingers crossed. But what I'm saying is, I think the next step should be that everybody should get a visa on arrival. I think we need to open the country up. I think the Afghan war really hurt us. And I think Afghanistan had to settle down. I suspect it's settling down, despite the last few months. So my own feeling would be that the next 3 to 5 years would be a good time frame to think about many of the things we do.
Thank you so much. This naturally takes us to the next set of questions that I wanted to ask. So I think a lot of the human capital discussion we've already had, but one specific thing that I did want to bring up in the discussion was where do we see Pakistani women in this entire debate? So Dr. Naveed talked about industrial policy and the need to focus on specific sectors like the light engineering sector. I recently started working with firms, and while the government sector has some female participation, other sectors, if you look at other sectors within our country, there's absolutely no participation from women, whether it's light engineering, whether it's sports, whether it's surgicals. So I just want to spend a few minutes discussing this issue, especially also in comparison with Bangladesh. I mean, a lot of people might say that, and we've also witnessed this, when we go visit farms and factories, sometimes, they're like, women's place is at home, or, we don't prefer women to be here working in the middle of so many men. But having said that, Bangladesh is a country that comes from a very similar religious and cultural background, and yet, when we compare the government sector in Bangladesh versus the government sector in Pakistan, we see that there are massively different female labor force participation rates. So just thinking about all of these issues, I would request our panelists to say a few words. Maybe Dr. Ali, if you can start that discussion, that would be great.
I think that there can't be any kind of social or development transformation in Pakistan without having a gender transformation. And I think that has to be really, really fundamental. And I think we have a history of very inspiring women in this country. I grew up in the 80s at a college over here. And the bastion of those dark times was the women's movement in Pakistan. And you go back to the early 20th century and you look at the debates that was happening around this question of reform of women's education in this part of the subcontinent. And there were just amazing ideas and amazing debates that were happening. And I think it is time that we recognize this and enabling this transition as one of the most important development needs in this country. A lot of my work is on gender, around building human capital, particularly around skills, and then recently I've been doing a lot of work on gender-based violence. And I think it goes back to really how we're going to organize space. There is kind of this myth that women, if you educate women, it's only for marriage, they drop out of the labor market, there's no demand for actually, and I think that's just rubbish. I think there is as women sort of go up the education ladder, they have aspirations and they have amazing ability to contribute. But what is kind of disrupting it, I think the sort of gender roles and the norms around those are pretty sticky. I'll give you an interesting statistic which kind of opened my mind. So I worked a lot on political participation. I have this nice paper with colleagues which basically shows that actually women's political participation is lower in cities, in your big cities relative to other parts of Pakistan. It's actually far, far lower, and shockingly low. And then, in doing that paper, we were looking at sort of different gender gaps. If you look at the gender gap in educational attainment, it's actually closing in these cities. But if you look at it in terms of paid economic participation or in terms of political participation, it's not moving very fast. So then the question is, how do you kind of go from sort of providing education, because the old story was as women become educated, they're naturally going to start to work, you're going to have fertility rates dropping and so on. That's certainly not happening. I think gender roles are sticky, we need a social conversation. I think sort of large family sizes are a big constraint. And Shahid Saab has talked about this, Nabil also mentioned it. Pakistan is an outlier on that count. So we haven't really thought about sort of this piece as a piece around gender. But I think three other things stick out. One is safety. Women entering the public safe is not safe. Okay? Like Borni, Erica Fields have done quite amazing work documenting those kind of challenges. Mobility is a big issue. But I'd also say flexibility is an issue. I think we now have the technologies to enable flexibility, but I think when it comes to safety and when it comes to mobility, then it really becomes a question of planning and policing. Right? So are we going to embed the gender mission as a planning mission and as a safety mission? And I don't see that as being a central part of those particular projects that is being led on the state. The state is feminizing, and I think sort of when it comes to these two things, feminization of the state is critical. I think it is feminizing in some sectors and others it's not at all. So again, sort of gender movements in terms of feminization of critical services has to be an important part of our social mission. But I think there's a lot of good ideas on the table. The research around gender questions in Pakistan is phenomenal. It's people from all sorts of institutions. And this is a debate, and women's movement and sort of women are at the forefront of a very progressive Pakistan. So I think this is a discussion that we certainly should be very optimistic.
The law school is very fortunate. One of the reasons I think we're got to where we are, and we hope we're moving in the right direction, is the law school is actually run by women. Some of us, some men are hanging around here. 100% of the administration are women. We have no clerks, we have no PMs. All our administration are female MBAs. 100% of them, all 120, 130 of them, all the way throughout the system. 80% of our faculty is women, and they're doing amazingly well. So we believe in what the topic is about. I think Ali has raised all the right issues. I do think that the starting point has to be female education, and it has to be school feeding programs and health programs. To me, I find it quite fascinating that a country, for instance, which has the highest wasting and stunting rates in the world, is not willing to consider universal school feeding programs or universal health programs for school kids, which are very easy to do. I do think that if we focus very hard on getting 100% of our children into school, seeing them as a constitutional right in our constitution, right, to education, which is currently interpreted as right to education to class 10 by the legal system. If we can deliver on that constitutional promise, and by the way, in my view, make sure that at least to middle school, that all the teachers are women, I think we went a huge way on that score. But I think it would be interesting to observe how she feels how much the matter of education and women. She is much better.
So one of the things that has struck me while I've been here is that it seems like the local school has figured this out, right? So there's been, right, we've had amazing speakers, really all over the country, certainly, and some of them have been women. And I'm going to say we're beating this candle. And so whatever the local school is doing, we should keep doing it, and everyone else should do it too. So just to give you some statistics about how bad US is for economics, only 18% of full professors of economics in the United States are women. So certainly the economists in the US have not figured this out. And I think your point of 100% of children in school and getting them the food and the teaching that they need, I mean, think about how many girls just don't have the opportunity to get the education that is required to then enter into government. And so really I think it needs to start at the very lowest basic level of making sure girls have the education, the health, the safety that they need, and then they can make their choices. And they can choose to be in government if that's something they would like. But I think right now there's so many girls who just don't have that choice because they don't have this really strong foundation that they would have gotten from education and feeding programs and early life opportunities. And then once the early life opportunities, we need to continue to mentor and support women in secondary school, in university, and there's a tremendous role models in this room, and I'm sure there's many others who would act as role models to these girls. And I think one thing that I've seen is that sometimes girls don't know what's possible, like they've only seen what they know, which might be very different than what is really possible. So first of all, of course, if you don't have education and you don't have enough food, then also seeing what's possible can be tremendously important and inspiring.
Sorry about that. One is that, it's interesting taking the one step slightly different, is that, when Teresa and I were doing a lot of work with the textile factories, we talked to the largest procurer of jeans, from Levi's, procuring, I'm sure, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of genes. And he said, you know, to tell you the truth, in every country we go to, the women are more productive than the men. They do a better job, they do a finer quality job, they take less cigarette breaks, less tea breaks. So, you know, it's this amazing thing where, you know, our factories are not hiring women, but the ones that do hire women, the few do then realize it. So it's a lack of information. It's a cultural thing, it's a safety thing, it's a flexibility thing. One other issue that is important that Adrian has also talked about it, because she did earlier, is childcare. So, you know, the flexibility of schedules, its transportation, its safety, and its availability of childcare. You know, and I think those things, you know, this could be provided, you know, by, you know, at least some form by the public sector or the private sector is absolutely critical. The other thing I wanted to bring up also, right, is the fact that, you know, I think, you know, the Lahore School is unique because also that, you know, it's, you know, I think we were very fortunate to train a lot of economists and other people, and a lot of women are working here, but a lot of women don't get the opportunities also, not in terms of the labor force, but also in terms of positions of power, in terms of in the government, etc. And I think, you know, one of the things I always suggested to Naveed when he's on the Monetary Policy Committee of the State Bank, and he knew the governor, we all did very well, the former governor. And I said, look, you know, why don't you do this, which is have a rule that every time there's a job opening, make it compulsory that at least one of the candidates, one or two of the candidates are working. Now, it sounded silly, but, you know, they did this with the National Football League in the US, but at least it would open up the eyes of the people hiring that, look, you know, there are people out there, you know, who are well qualified and, you know, and are willing, right? And Naveed, I know you wanted to say a few words.
Well, thank you. I think that to some extent, Ali put his finger on the puzzle that on education for women, particularly at the higher level, Pakistan has done very well. But we are not seeing women in the workplace. You know, having a conversation with Adrian, that we have been trying to work on this issue. How do we get women in the workplace? Obviously, constraints that we mentioned, security, mobility, and all are very important. But we need to figure this one out because this is a chicken and egg problem. Because these women, if you get them into the workplace, they will be role models to get more women into the workplace. Now, on that one, I think that I'm going to take over the role of the chair, and I'm going to ask Hamna to talk about it because she's done a lot of work on it. And after that, maybe when I threatened to bring Farah into this, he said, I'll talk about female labor force participation. So maybe if you would permit, Hamna, if you could address this issue, the question that you raised, and then maybe Farah can say something about it.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting this.
Cool. You were to ask Kapna, you were sure.
So I think the first project that we started on the issue of female labor force participation, I think the motivation behind that when we were writing our grant applications started from exactly what Dr. Ali was pointing out, that, you know, we see women outnumbering men in your higher educational institutes in Pakistan, and despite that, in urban centers, only about 10% of the women actually transition into the labor force. And we thought, I mean, in some of our work, we tried to understand whether it's a matter of low aspirations, it's a matter of lack of motivation. And what we found was, so what we did was we tried to expose these women to role models and mentors, women who had, you know, gone through similar life circumstances as these young college students. And what we found was that it was really the women who were from relatively lower income, even within that cohort, those who were from the lower income households, they were more, you know, keen on wanting to make an effort, wanting to, you know, despite whatever challenges they were facing, wanting to still, you know, go ahead and, you know, join the labor force. It was women from the relatively better off households. They did not seem to, like, for them, education was more of a way of, you know, as you pointed out, a way of signaling and perhaps getting better marriage market outcomes, etc. And they were also the ones who social norms. So that's one part of our work. The other part which we're still trying to figure out is in firms in the government sector, why do we see such low rates of female labor force participation? At one point, we were trying to work with Interloop, which is the largest hoistry manufacturer in the world. And we came up with like 10 different potential interventions, and when we visited their different factories and outlets that they had, they seem to have each and every one of those. So they seem to be, so you know, we came across, we went to firms where people were saying, oh, we don't want women in our factories because 20 years ago we hired a woman and this is what happened, and since then, you know, we don't want any women. And then there was this massive company which is doing so well, and all they have in their management, on their factory floors are women. They have daycare centers, they have accommodation, they have transport, you name it and they've done it. And that really, you know, makes you understand that despite everything that we talk about, despite all of the challenges, it's possible. And there are companies out there who successfully done this. And I think these are the kinds of champions that we need to identify, and we need to kind of promote them, and perhaps, you know, I think they do a lot of social responsibility work, but I think these are the kinds of, I think, champions of change, so to speak, that they can be. So I think I'll stop here, but if you want to say something.
I think a lot has already been said, particularly with Dr. Chima and Hamna's very detailed answer. But I think one thing I just want to maybe also highlight is the power of the social norms. I mean, there's one social norm that Marie and I have worked on, which is basically it's not considered appropriate for women to lead the household. The other norm is also something that we discovered actually in a course that we did with our students, where we did find that parents don't differentiate, at least in the urban center, between educating the boys or the girls. And we see this in our data as well. We do see that there is this, you know, parents understand that girls have to be educated. And there's also this fact that, so Tahir Ibrahim was actually presenting his work maybe now 2 years ago. They've done a lot of work in education. And they said, you know, it is moving some metrics, but one thing that it wasn't doing was, it wasn't actually leading to outcomes that we would expect to see. So here's the puzzle. So parents are educating their girls, they're not sending them to work. It doesn't lead to them marrying more educated men. What is the incentive for educating girls? And so why is it that parents are doing? Some of the things that we got from this exceptional work that the students did is that this is, you know, it's necessity-based work, as you were saying, so it's an emergency measure. If the household needs an additional person to earn income, then it's more suitable for a slightly educated woman to do that rather than someone who's not even educated. There's evidence from India that indicates that when women are working, the constraint is not, or the concern is not that it reflects badly on the woman herself, but it reflects badly on her husband for not being able to provide. And that somehow that concern is less of a concern when the woman is actually a bit more educated. Right? So she has high school education or college education. So I do agree with Dr. Nand, it's a chicken and egg problem. Some of these norms will change when more and more women work, but how do we have that initial push? Hamna indicated some of this as role models, but it's also hard to believe that women don't know other women working. So it's not just that, it has to be something else. It can't be cash, so how do we actually have this big push? I actually don't know the answer. I think part of it, one little thing is that maybe having decent work options and decent and be flexible is important. So what is it that women or the household members think is a good, respectable work for women to do? I think part of the reason why we have so many good female teachers is that it is considered decent work. That's right.
I just wanted to bring up an issue that hasn't so much been, maybe it's been alluded to but not mentioned as much explicitly, is the structure of households, and that women aren't really, single women permitted to live on their own. So women go from living with their parents to living with their in-laws. And there's very little of men joining the woman's household. It's 99% of the time the woman joining her in-laws' household. And but that living in that joint family arrangement can either be freeing or restricting for the woman in terms of her labor force participation. If she has a supportive mother-in-law, then that can be providing support in terms of managing the household duties, the child care duties, and that would free up a woman to be working. On the other hand, if there are different kinds of expectations, from the mother-in-law on the woman, then she may be very constrained in terms of her ability to work outside the home.
I was thinking of what Farah said about what will push the women out. I once asked this question in the US somebody asked his friend, and the gentleman said to me, he said actually in the US before the Second World War, the women were all sick. He said it was only, and he said if the women were working, they were only working as school teachers. They were supposed to be the only respectable profession in the US before the Second World War. The fact that there were no men left in the US meant that the women had to go out and fill their space. Now in Pakistan, people have asked the question, what will push the women out? Unfortunately, the Pakistani men are reproducing so fast that we can't think of any way of making them into a shortage. We can't think of any sensible way. But maybe we can carve out some areas of the economy which can be fast-growing areas, which can be left to them. To give me an example, as I said, education up to middle school should be entirely. There's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be. Preventative health care, for instance, it should be entirely stopped by women. So what I'm saying is, I think once people get imaginative enough, we can carve out areas where women have a natural competitive advantage and where, frankly, the men are just wasting their time. I'm sure women teachers also probably don't teach, but the number of men teachers who don't teach will be higher.
I would guess that's a metric,
but so my own feeling would be that we need to push the women out, and the way, if we can't do it, and God forbid that we actually have a shortage of men, we need to carve out spaces, safe spaces for women, for which we can offer them large volumes of safe employment within the parameters of the safety.
Could I say one thing? There's this one interesting, which is, I don't know for people who don't know the Pakistani context, one very interesting puzzle is that the way you get into medical school in Pakistan is you pass this entrance test, you take a test, and then you only the top percentage, a few percentage qualified to go to medical school. Historically speaking, the women are the ones who always dominate those tests. And the women are the ones who then enter the most into the medical schools. But then these women don't end up actually practicing as doctors, a lot of them. To the point where men said they should be quotas for men in these medical schools so that we get more spots because we are going to end up working as doctors and all. No. What I'm just saying is, it would be interesting to link that to, health, which is bring these, hospitals, develop hospitals, develop these, primary care facilities, other facilities which are staffed by women, could be part of the government-funded, as we said, healthcare program, and bring these women doctors who are not coming back into the legal force, not practicing as doctors back into the legal force. I'm not saying.
Because I think, one thing that I've heard a lot around this room is we think about, women are not stupid, right? They're utility maximizers, right? So everyone is making a decision but subject to some kind of constraint. And so to think about if we want more women to enter into medicine or to enter labor force, we have to think about those constraints and think about what are the salient ones that are holding women back. And I'm really not surprised that women are the top scorers on these things. If you think about, for a woman to get to this very high level, she's had to overcome a million things that maybe the men have not had to overcome. So it's not surprising that you get to this top echelon, the women are doing so much better because they've had to fight their way to get there. So what if we made it a little easier, right? Like what if we got rid of some of those constraints? And so I think just to the point of the World War II, is one of the reasons women could go to work was because that was the first time there was large child care centers open in the United States. So prior to World War II, it was all family-based, or if the woman worked, it would be she left the child with like mom or aunt or something like that. But starting in World War II, there became large child care centers that women could leave their children and so they could work, and it's also employed women in these child care centers. So that lifted the constraint. So it was a supply and a demand issue, right? They needed people to work in factories, and they also then released the constraint.
So I mean, picking up on this point, I think the same is true of firms. Firms are also profit maximizers.
Yes.
So the fact is, once you factor in the cost of the social norm, the cost of providing safe transport, actually the cost of hiring a woman is probably higher than the cost of hiring a man. There's a great survey done by one of these job portals about 6-7 years ago, where they looked at the cost of an average man and a woman who had applied on their portal. This is travel costs. And there was a threefold difference because the woman who was kind of applying had to go in rickshaws or buses, and the male was going on motorcycle. So that just kind of changed the cost structure altogether. So, and I think it's an issue of scale. And what you're saying, Interloop has done it. The question is, why is Interloop not being replicated? Because Interloop has a mission. And they are willing to bear that high cost. The horse school has a mission. Has a mission. So we say, okay, in order to do this, we will set up a daycare center on campus. But a lot of factories are not going to do that. So that's where the role of the public sector comes in. That if you could provide public transport that actually is targeted and lowers the cost, or you could provide some subsidies for setting up daycares, then those could be mechanisms in which you just change the cost structure, the relative cost. And on the flip side then, what's happening in households, and there's a great set of papers done by a colleague of ours who's in the business school, Aisha Masood. She's a doctor herself, did an anthropology PhD, and her whole question is, why do actually women, medical graduates drop out of the labor market? And ironically, by the way, they don't drop out before they do their house job, and house jobs in hospitals are really tough. They drop out after that, particularly once they get married. And the reason is that the control over private transport belongs to the husband or the father. And these jobs sort of, you can't go in at a particular time at 9 o'clock and come away at 1, which is perhaps what works with schools. But when you have jobs which require this constant negotiation, and you don't have the first dibs on the private transport, and then the norm is you can't really go and use the bus because it's unsafe, then you're crippled. You're just setting up for the problem to be a failure. So, private solutions can work. Big organizations should certainly take the lead to embed the mission and to put a direction. But at the end of the day, if you want to scale it, this has to be part of our planning and our safety mission in the government. And I completely agree with Chaya. A big success story of government coming in and actually feminizing the whole thing was the lady health workers. That has had a big effect. I've always been a proponent of public healthcare workers largely being women. I also think within the police, gender-based violence has become such a big issue in Pakistan that I don't see how you can address it till you feminize the police to a much greater extent at a very front line. So these are kind of, I think, big pushes that can be done. I think they're on the agenda. We have this wonderful thing happens in Pakistan every year, very contentious, very hard, called the Audit March. That's women already, I mean, I don't want us to go away thinking that women don't have agency in Pakistan. Women have fought a very hard battle, and they're still fighting that battle. And I think it is really about how we push the conversation to enable some of the things that have been articulated in these ways.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. That was an amazing way of articulating some of the issues that we were talking about. I would now like to invite Dr. Naved to conclude the session and provide some remarks on the conference in general and also on the session more specifically.
I think the session ended on a very good note for two reasons. As I was telling Adrian, I do see women in the workplace, in the public space, as the game changer in this country. And therefore, looking at how what one can do about it is the right question. And some very interesting suggestions have come forward on what are the ways to do it. So, I think on a very positive note, it has ended. And I agree with you, that's what I was exactly saying, that these women who want jobs in the public colleges come from very low middle class families. Like these, I remember 60-70%, their mothers are not educated. The fathers have only a mentor. The fact that they've gone up to this 16 years of education means that these are very special women. And if the transition for them is 10% only into the workplace, that means that the barriers are really, really strong. And so one has to look at how one can reduce the barriers, and also the other side, which Amna did not mention, how can we take work to the home space which is productive, which is the IT technology-based work. And I think that's another area that Amna has been working on, and the center has been working on. So that is some, I think, concluding on this session. I think that's the most important thing to come out of the session. Other stuff is okay. As far as the conference is concerned, our purpose really is to some extent epitomize this what we are doing, is to talk together about issues, as well as for Pakistan is not a country that most foreign visitors will come to now. But bringing economists from all over the world here, one, the message they can go away with, hey, that's not such a bad place, I can do work there. And two, to make friends with the staff at the Lahore school and see that they are of a high enough quality that you'll be willing to have them as partners on research. So that is one of the goals of this conference, I would say, in terms of networking. The other point is that it allows us to, young researchers, to put forward their papers, to present their papers, to get feedback from some very experienced economists. Adrian is here, and Jonathan was here, and all the other economists, the senior economists can give us feedback. And then we like to invite much more of the younger economists, because we feel that we have a better possibility of forming partnerships with them to do work in Pakistan. They don't have a long already pipeline of projects ongoing, so that's why we invite a lot of people who just have finished the postdoc and are assistant professors, or either postdoc and one even pre-doc, so we hope that we will continue that. And we also have started at the Lahore School, and again, I think that I must thank our rector for his vision to allow us to put together a conference like this. Is very expensive. I mean, travel has become absurdly expensive now. But still to allow us to put together and also allow us to have a fellowship program. That means every year we have an international researcher spend 6 weeks to 3 months. Ultimately, I hope we can get them to spend a semester here. And we hope to start a PhD program, so maybe they can teach in it and they can do some research here in terms of the project they're working on and work with some of the other staff in Pakistan. So that I would, Amna and others can work, make sure that we get the next call for that, and I hope some of you will consider participating in that. We, just because of our age, I think, happen to be on a lot of policy committees and stuff like that. And the conversation that we have here is something that we can get into the public discourse on the government, say, higher level. I mean, what Ali was making claim for on taxation was something that he was involved in at least, I think, 5 or 6 years ago when we were talking about property tax. So that is another, I think, benefit. Dr. Azam is involved with a lot of work with the Chamber of Commerce. I am with the State Bank. And then all of us, then we work with Ministry of Commerce, or people from Ministry of Commerce are here. So the idea really is, and since most of funding also comes from the International Growth Center, the idea is what you were saying, that evidence-based policy. So we hope to be able to facilitate that end of it. So once the research is there, the findings are there, to communicate it to the government people, policy makers or policy decision makers. So that is the purpose of this conference. I think it is, I'm very happy. I think it has been well fulfilled. And but I would like to turn over again to Amna, because there may be something that I might have missed in my summing up. But one last point that I want to make is that we are a very small group, but our focus is on gender. And whether it is with regards to female labor force participation, earlier much more was on inclusiveness and financial inclusiveness. That was an area that we were, but again, it all has this gender filter on it. And all our researchers, except Gokal, who's sitting there, only man in there who is sticking it out. But we hope that through this process of interaction, we can continue to expand both our research as well as our faculty or our researchers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naved. I would, because we don't have the podium anymore, so I've taken over Zainab's job. So I will now invite the rector to provide his concluding remarks.
Thank you. No, it's a great pleasure to present these concluding remarks. And Naved, I think, has thanked all of you, the participants. I'd like to thank Vice Chancellor of Dr. Chima, Dr. Evelyn, and all the distinguished presenters for the wonderful contributions they made, the papers they presented, and the remarks. We've tried to, I think, make sure that you got adequate coverage. I think you've been sort of broadcasting live a lot of your presentations. They are on Facebook, and I presume we'll be following up subject to your permissions with any further dissemination we do. For me, actually, I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend all the sessions, but this particular conference has become a real jewel, I think, for the law school. When we started this applied development economics conference, about 4 years ago? 6 years ago, I was very curious to see where we would end up. But this combination of having leading academics, both faculty, but also PhD students, has proved to be a wonderful way of presenting it. All of you here, both faculty from all over the world, and I'm glad to see some familiar faces. And the PhD, almost to be people who are finishing their PhD presentations. For us, I think from these leading institutions in the world, are frankly faculty, I'm concerned. So having you come here has been a great privilege for the law school. I'd like to thank you for coming to the law school, and particularly of coming to Pakistan. I was thinking last night, I said, I think we try to make them comfortable. But I said, given this schedule of 10 in the morning to 8 in the evening and coming in Africa, I was keeping my fingers crossed. I said, I hope they'll stay on at least one extra night and actually see them all. But if you haven't, you plan to be here, and if you haven't made any arrangements.
There's a tour tomorrow.
They go tomorrow?
Yeah, there's a tour tomorrow.
So there is a tour, thank God. So at least we are at least showing you a bit of the whole, the Lahoris are very possessive about it. All people. I went to Iran once and I went to Isfahan, and there they were saying Isfahan is half the world. So I said, who said this? He said, obviously somebody from Isfahan. So the Lahoris obviously are very happy with that old little city, big city. So I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank our faculty. Some of our faculty, senior faculty, have been sitting through this. I'm grateful for them for being here. Our students, our graduate students have been here, sitting here, so thank you all so much. And, this tells you, this piece of paper, of who actually runs the law school. These are the concluding remarks which were presented to me by who? You. So I've been told this is exactly what I do. So thank you. I'd like to thank all the CRED staff for bringing this conference together. I would like to thank Dr. Naved and Dr. Hamda for organizing this conference. I would like to thank Zainab Idris and Zainab Nassim for taking care of all the logistics, Mania and Shahbano for social media updates, Fatima Jamil, Dr. Sonia for taking care of the participant registrations, Sada Asif and Eamon Junaid for live streaming. So thank you so much. Special thanks to the student volunteers, you know, we treasure them. You know, we are at this moment on literally the last day of application. We start part-time on Monday. So they've been here for the last 3 days, helping all of us out to try to make it work. Thank you, student volunteers. Thank you, Dr. Azam, and the Innovation and Technology Center and the Law School Administration staff. From the Law School's administration staff, I'd like to thank Farooq Saab, who's in charge of our administration and looks after all of us here. Nasir Saab for printing, I think he did a great job with the printing. Naila did the press coverage. Thank you, Naila. We got some nice coverage. Shirazi Saab for security and other facilitation. Intizar for pictures. Arshad Sahib and his team for taking care of the finances. Here I'd like to thank Naveed, Najis, and the Center, the Consortium for Relevant Policies for co-financing this arrangement with us. Johan and Shahid for IT and acoustic arrangements. Aziza, who's our head of catering, and his team for teas and lunches, and all the volunteers. Custodial staff and all school faculty for participating. I would actually really would wish very kindly to please thank all our custodial staff and especially our working level staff. Thank you ever so much. Very well done. You know, it's quite fascinating. I occasionally sort of, when I want to really feel jealous and insecure, I look up the websites of sort of the leading universities in the world. And there are these business schools. And they have huge write-ups. You know, we have 20 people sitting there on cameras, you know, putting the multimedia together, and 5 doing this, and 4 doing that. And, you know, it's obviously a big deal. Amazing